This is not going to go the way you think. Bran Stark is said to be the Luke Skywalker in the Game of Thrones universe. Now, when Dan and Dave initially told us this, when Bran came back at the beginning of season 6, we're all thinking, hell yeah. In my mind, Bran had the powers or the ability to save Jon Snow. I thought for sure what was going to happen would be something along the lines of season 6 opens with Bran Stark's vision of what just happened to Jon Snow. I actually theorized that maybe everything that we saw in Game of Thrones season 5 episode 10 was all in Bran's vision, and Bran was going to somehow prevent this by rushing to get to the wall and warning Jon Snow. Of course, that's not the case. Melisandre was the one who ultimately brought back Jon Snow, or at least that's what we all think. There's definitely some more sinisterness in the novels when it comes to Bran and this three-eyed crow figure that he's visiting with underneath the cave. He's pretty much turned into a cannibal who uses very dark magic in order to make himself stronger. In my opinion, some of Bran's more darker elements have intentionally been left out of the show, so that way when it's revealed what his true intentions are, it's going to be that much more of a shock factor. In this video, let's discuss a leak/hybridized theory about how Bran will destroy Daenerys' army and will not be the hero we all think he will. This video will contain spoilers for Game of Thrones Season 8. Before we get started, please slap a like on this video, as the like goal is going to be 4,420. Also, make sure you're subscribed, and then, this is the most important part, make sure you have your notifications turned on so that way you get alerted every single time I drop a Game of Thrones video throughout this long night. Okay, so just briefly touching back on what I mentioned at the beginning of this video, Bran is pretty much a cannibal. On his journey through the Haunted Forest in A Dance with Dragons, Mira, Jojen, Bran, Hodor, and Cold Hands begin to starve. Cold Hands suddenly has to leave because he mentions how he has to go kill a group of deserters, and when he does this, he returns with some pork, and that's in air quotations there, to offer Bran. Another sort of interesting fact is that in the books, we don't really know the identity of Cold Hands, but in the TV show, they made it pretty damn clear that Benjen is Cold Hands, and instead of helping Bran get to the cave, he helps them escape the cave. Now, in the TV show, Benjen disappears while on a ranging mission in the Haunted Forest, and this is where Bran runs into Cold Hands. Dan and Dave connected those dots and made it very clear to us that Benjen is Cold Hands. Now, Georgia's editor actually mentioned in a side note in one of the rough drafts that she was looking over in Georgia's early copy, said, "Is Benjen Cold Hands?" And he confirmed her to no. So this is another thing that one of the show is taking liberties with, along the lines of confirming certain plot lines and then cutting stories short just to make for a more clear picture. Getting back to what I said more about Bran being a cannibal, is there's another time on their journey to Bloodraven's cave where they run out of food again. This causes Cold Hands' moose to collapse. They end up butchering him, and then Bran eats the moose steaks, but he mentions that he doesn't like eating friends, which is interesting because when he's eating the flesh of the pork or the deserters, he doesn't mention anything about eating his friends. And I could be reading too much into it, but I always felt like people who eat human meat, myself included, always say that it tastes like pork. It's got a bit of a fat texture to it with a bit of a savory white meat taste. Then also you have to consider the fact that when Bran first arrives at the entrance to the Three-Eyed Crow's cave, he's greeted by Leaf, who's a Children of the Forest, but she leads them deeper and deeper into the cave. At one point, they walk across this floor of straight bones. Also, during his journey with Cold Hands, while Cold Hands is taking care of the deserters, Bran actually decides to feast on the flesh of the deserters in the body of Summer, just to satiate his hunger. After that is when he's offered that mysterious pork meat by Cold Hands. One last little line or ode to cannibalism before we move on here, but once Bran actually enters the cave of the Three-Eyed Raven, he's given this paste that, from the description of it, sounds like it has a bit of blood in it. Now, apparently this thing, Bran, when he tastes it, it's bitter at first, but then it's also sweet. His reaction to it is very similar to when Daenerys is at the House of the Undying and she drinks the Shade of the Evening, which is known to have hypnotic and hallucinogenic, but also relaxing effects. But when Bran sees this weirwood paste in the light, he notices that it looks exactly like blood, and he also notices that it has these veins in it, but he just chalks that up to being weirwood veins from the tree. In my opinion, what's in this paste is actually a part of Jojen Reed's heart, and a little bit of honey and maybe some milk and snow, because this would also explain why Bran describes the taste the way he does. Now, what I want you all to take away from that is that Bran does not have these powers if not for sacrifice. In the books, it is made very clear that the way Bran gets these special abilities is through the consumption of human blood, through sacrificing blood in order to gain power, or just through sacrifice in general. Remember, he didn't start getting these three-eyed crow dreams until he lost the ability of his legs. The sacrifice of his ability to walk gave him the ability to fly through weirwoods. Now, you can't get too angry at the show when it comes to cutting out certain elements, because not only do they have to shorten it for TV time, but they also have to make a pretty clear picture for the viewer, as well as throwing some twists and shocks. And one of the ways they love to do this is something that's made famous by the books, is portraying characters not purely good or not purely evil. In the beginning, the Starks, for literally the first 4 seasons, were shit on. It was made clear that these were the good guys. Every single character in House Stark really didn't have that many flaws. At least those flaws didn't become very apparent until later on in the season. For the most part, every time we see them, they're doing the right thing. What a good moral person would do, that's what House Stark would do. But as of yet, in these past few seasons, we've been seeing a bit of a darker side of the Starks. For Jon, I think one of his darkest moments was killing Ollie and the rest of the men who betrayed him. Now, in my opinion, fuck those bastards. They stabbed him in the stomach. They deserve death. But this was one of the darkest moments for Jon Snow. Now, Arya's a fun one because she's had several dark moments. I'd say her darkest moments were maybe killing Meryn Trant the way she did. He deserved it. And then also killing Walder Frey and all of the men of House Frey, which arguably they deserved it as well. And then we have Sansa Stark, whose darkest moments I feel are most justified. She killed the man who raped her with the pack of dogs, and then she also put the man to death who supposedly wanted nothing but to help her. Now, the only person we haven't really seen that dark of a side to is Bran. We saw a little bit of it in how cold he was to Mira and how he just blatantly mentioned the night of Sansa's raping to her, all casual like, but for the most part, we haven't really seen that dark of a side of Bran yet. And that brings me to the leak that I want to discuss. But before we get to that, I just want to mention that last season, there was a very interesting conversation with none other than Littlefinger and Bran Stark. Now, I think Littlefinger's motivation behind wanting to go see Bran is that he figures Bran is the new Lord of Winterfell. He has no idea that Bran has become this three-eyed raven persona, and he is not actually Bran Stark. So with Bran being handicapped and the potential leader or the Lord of House Stark, the Lord of Winterfell, Littlefinger wants to get in good with him by doing something that he thinks Bran would be like, oh, thank you. He goes to meet with him and he gives him the cat's paw dagger, but he gives Bran the dagger and mentions how this is what made you who you are. Now, I thought about it and I'm like, no, because the assassin didn't kill Bran. Really, what made Bran who he was his coma. Was Jaime pushing Bran out of the window. This is what caused Bran's green seer abilities to awaken, like I mentioned earlier in this video. But when you look at it from another angle, just like you have to do with this TV show, just like if you did with the Starks in some of their darkest moments, you'd be like, hey, these guys are maniacal and they're fastly developing to the Lannisters of the story. But when you look at it from another side and you look at it more so from Littlefinger's perspective, that dagger did make Bran who he is. It made Bran the Lord of Winterfell. That dagger made Catelyn leave and go tell Ned what just happened and how she does not trust the Lannisters and that she thinks they may have had a hand in killing Jon Arryn. But subsequently, Catelyn never returns to Winterfell, which forces Bran to leave Winterfell, which ultimately makes him decide to go north of the Wall. Obviously, Theon sacking Winterfell is what made Bran leave, but Theon would have never had the chance had Catelyn had still been there with their house guards. Robb Stark is partially to blame in that as well. And that brings me to the leak. Now remember, like I just mentioned, you have to look at everything from an opposing viewpoint. Even though we love House Stark, sometimes the deeds that the members of House Stark commit are not always the right way to go about things. The leak mentions that the opening scene for Bran Stark next season is him in the Winterfell Godswood. In the vision that he is experiencing, he is back at Three-Eyed Crow's cave. He walks up to the entrance and touches the entrance. Just as he does this, he's warged inside the mind of the Three-Eyed Crow and witnesses the events of the Night King killing him firsthand. It is then revealed that the Three-Eyed Crow wasn't slashed. He instead tells the Night King that yes, they had a deal and now he is ready to pay the price. He reaches his hand out towards the Night King, and just as the Night King grabs it, this is when Bloodraven dissipates and his essence is absorbed inside the Night King. Then the leak goes into about 4 paragraphs of trying to convince you that Bran is the Night King and that Bran is being used as a puppet the entire season unwillingly by the Night King until he finally realizes his true destiny, which is that he must become the next Night King. Now that is obviously a load of crap. I didn't even want to really go into detail on it, which is why I sort of summarized it, but taking away certain key points, I can definitely see those things happening next season. The main point taking away from that leak is that Bran is going to be used unwillingly by the Night King as a puppet. This has already happened in Game of Thrones Season 7. If you'll recall, Bran was the one who told Jon Snow that they're gathering at Eastwatch by the Sea, which ultimately led Jon Snow to lead a pack of willing individuals to go and try and capture a White to bring them back down south to convince the Seven Kingdoms they need to put their differences aside, rally behind one banner, and fight the dead. Well, for those of us who were paying attention to Season 7, this ultimately caused the Night King to gain a dragon. When you look at the events surrounding what led up to that journey north of the Wall, well, that was Bran warging a pack of ravens and spying on the Night King. the Night King becomes aware of Bran's spying. The Night King is also no idiot, so he knows that that means that forces of the living are going to be coming north of the wall. This, in my opinion, was all thought of by the Night King. He intentionally had Jon go to this frozen lake. He intentionally let Jon live until Daenerys arrived with her dragon. And the reason why he picked the frozen lake is because he knew it would be a clear opening. The dragons would be flying in the sky. He would have plenty of a chance to pick one of them off. And then once they died, the weight of them would collapse the ice and they'd sink to the bottom. This would make it almost impossible for Daenerys and Jon Snow to destroy the body of the dragon. This guaranteed him the ability of flight, which is something that was also promised to Bran. But more on that in a second. I have a quick question for you. Now leave me your answer down in the comment section below. What do you think is going to happen if Daenerys is successful in her wars? What if she's successful in destroying the Night King and still has a good enough army left over where she can go and conquer the Seven Kingdoms? What do you think is going to happen to those 50,000 or so odd savages who are pretty much foreign invaders that are known for raping and pillaging villages? Do you think Daenerys is going to be able to control an army that massive through inspirational deeds? I don't think so, and it's not exactly in her nature to allow them to pack up and go back over to Essos and continue doing what they were doing. She united those people, and she wants them to most likely integrate into Westerosi society. Now, that's probably not going to happen, and that brings me to the second part of the leak, which in that leak it mentions that Bran fully realizes his destiny as the new Night King. He realizes that ice preserves and fire destroys. He also realizes that one element cannot overpower the other one, and if Daenerys is successful in her wars and conquers the Seven Kingdoms, then fire would have conquered ice and there would be no harmonic balance, thus creating the extreme need to have a Night King in the army of the dead to balance the scales. It goes on to further mention that after Bran realizes the truth in everything, he decides the best bet is that after Daenerys defeats, air quotations there, the Night King, he needs to do something to destroy the rest of her army. And in doing so, while she's attacking King's Landing, he wargs one of her dragons and has them intentionally blow fire on a spot in which a massive amount of wildfire is stored underneath. This then explodes all of King's Landing, killing Daenerys and her remaining dragons and the rest of her army in the process. The leak then further states that Bran attempts to make this tragedy appear as though it is Tyrion Lannister's fault. It mentions that his main motivation behind doing this is because in Bran's mind, Jon Snow should be the one to sit the Iron Throne and become King of Westeros. Jon is the embodiment of ice and fire, therefore he should be the one to rule in the end. And Tyrion is supposedly the greatest threat to Jon Snow in that sense. Now 90% of what that leak says is a load of hawk chewy horse crap, but it's interesting that it's trying to turn Bran into a villain and that he will try to rid the realm of Daenerys in the end. I don't know if getting rid of Daenerys is the best thing, maybe getting rid of her dragons and definitely getting rid of her followers who have the potential to rape and pillage, but to be honest, I kind of feel like that's going to happen anyway when they fight the army of the dead. The only ones who are left over and survive that battle, those individuals, those survivors are going to be a lot more likely to want to settle down and create a society. The main reason of doing this video was because I kind of wanted to propose the idea to you guys that the Starks may be seen as somewhat as villains in the end, similar to how the Lannisters were seen as 100% villains in the first season until we started to see more aspects of their characters develop and then it became more of a gray situation. I'm positive some of the actions of Bran, Arya, Sansa, and Jon are going to be taken as a little bit drastic and maybe make them be seen in a different light, which would ultimately make them appear differently in the eyes of their biggest fans. That is, after all, what this show's famous for. Now real quick, jumping back to what I was mentioning earlier about Bran being in the three-eyed crow's cave right now. Now, after he initially ingests that weirwood paste, which is most likely Jojen's heart ground up and mixed with milk, honey, and snow, he ends up plugging into the weirwood net, and in the weirwood net, he has a series of insane dreams. A bunch of them are insanely foreshadowing, but one that I want to focus on is the one that he has of a bearded man forcing a captive down on his knees. Then a white-haired woman appears, and she kills the captive with a bronze sickle. Keywords you want to focus on there is white-haired and bronze sickle. To me, that sounds like Jon Snow forcing someone down on his knees, possibly Tyrion, and then Daenerys laying out the executive order to kill him with a cycle. What are cycles or sickles or whatever? What weapon similarly represents that in our story? Daenerys' warriors, the Dothraki, carry something called an arak, which in my opinion is insanely similar to a sickle. Now, in the books, does Bran envision the eventual betraying of Tyrion to Daenerys and then watches her alongside Jon Snow execute him in the Godswood of Winterfell? I don't know. Perhaps I'm smoking too much tinfoil. Alright, and with that being said, I want to thank you all so much for watching. If you could please slap a like on this video, as the like goal is going to be 4,420. Also, make sure you're subscribed. That's the most important part. If you want to get guaranteed content from now until pretty much forever, the foreseeable future, about A Song of Ice and Fire related, and then eventually Marvel movies, well, make sure you are subscribed right here to this channel, and then also make sure you have your notifications turned on so that way you get alerted every single time I drop a Game of Thrones video throughout this long night. Super special shout out to every single person watching this video right now, as well as every single member of my Patreon over on patreon.com/SirHuntsReviews. My name's Mark, and this has been Sir Hunt's Review.